I never expected my 32nd birthday to become the day my entire world flipped upside down. For years, my family had treated me like the black sheep, the disappointment who couldn't get her life together, while secretly I was building something they could never imagine. But when they forgot my birthday gift at my own party, and then William Sterling walked through our front door to make an announcement that would shatter everything they thought they knew about me, I realized that sometimes the universe has perfect timing for revealing the truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and according to my family, I was the walking embodiment of wasted potential. The daughter who had thrown away every advantage they'd given me, who had dropped out of business school at UC Davis to pursue what my mother dismissively called playing around on computers. For the past 8 years, I had let them believe I was barely surviving as a freelance graphic designer, scraping together rent money in my cramped apartment at Pine Grove, living paycheck to paycheck while everyone else in the family achieved what they considered real success. What they didn't know was that Sarah's design studio, my supposed little freelance business, had evolved far beyond creating logos for local coffee shops. What started as a simple website design service had transformed into Sterling Creative Solutions, one of the most influential digital marketing agencies on the West Coast. My small computer hobby now employed over 300 people across 4 states, with major offices in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, and our headquarters right here in Riverside Valley, though none of my family knew it existed. Last year alone, my companies generated over $200 million in revenue. We handled digital marketing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, tech startups that became billion-dollar unicorns, and entertainment brands that dominated global markets. The little computer games my family mocked had become comprehensive digital strategies that launched products, built empires, and created cultural phenomena. But to my family, I was still the disappointing daughter who couldn't hold down a real job. The deception hadn't been intentional at first. When I'd left UC Davis during my junior year, the family's reaction had been so harsh, so filled with shame and disappointment, that I'd simply stopped correcting their assumptions about my life. When my business started growing exponentially, I was too focused on building my empire to waste energy on their narrow definitions of success. When the money started flowing in faster than I could count it, I was too hurt by their lack of faith to share my achievements with people who had already written me off as a failure. Somewhere along the way, watching how they treated me when they thought I was struggling became a fascinating study in family dynamics and human psychology. I lived modestly when around them, drove a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla to family gatherings, and shopped at Target for clothes I'd wear to their events. My real wardrobe, filled with designer pieces and custom business attire, stayed hidden in my actual home, a sprawling estate in Hillcrest Manor that cost more than my parents had earned in their entire working lives. The modest apartment they knew about was just a convenient fiction, a place I maintained specifically to keep up the illusion of struggle. My brother David Mitchell had no such struggles with family perception. At 35, 3 years my senior, he was everything our parents had dreamed of in a successful child. Business degree from Cal State, management position at Patterson and Associates Marketing, married to the perfectly polished Jessica, father to 2 well-behaved children who attended private school and played competitive soccer. David lived in a beautiful ranch house in the Riverside Heights subdivision, drove a leased BMW, and wore suits that he bought on credit to maintain his image of success. He was also the most systematically cruel person I'd ever encountered. David had perfected the art of psychological warfare disguised as brotherly concern. "Sarah's here with her little computer projects again," he'd announce whenever I arrived at family gatherings, his voice carrying that particular blend of amusement and condescension that made everyone feel superior to me. "Did you bring us some of those websites you've been making for that taco truck?" The family would chuckle politely, and I would smile and nod, playing the part of the struggling sister who was grateful to be included in their successful lives. What they didn't know was that the little computer projects David dismissed so casually included the digital campaign that had launched 3 companies into the Fortune 500, the social media strategy that had turned a small startup into a household name, and the comprehensive digital transformation that had saved a failing retail chain and resulted in them hiring us for a $50 million multi-year contract. The websites he mocked had been featured in industry publications, won international awards, and been studied at business schools as examples of innovative digital marketing. My parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, had long since given up any hope that I would amount to anything significant. Dad, a retired postal worker who had spent 30 years delivering mail with quiet dignity, would pat my shoulder sympathetically and ask if I needed help with my little business. Mom, a former elementary school teacher who had devoted her career to shaping young minds, would sigh dramatically whenever anyone asked about her children, always leading with David's achievements and mentioning me as an afterthought, if at all. David just got promoted to senior account manager, she'd say with obvious pride, and Sarah is still trying to figure out her path. Still trying to figure out my path. At 32 years old, while running a business empire that had revolutionized digital marketing for dozens of major corporations. The most painful part wasn't the mockery or the dismissal, it was the genuine pity in their eyes. They truly believed I was a failure, a disappointment who had squandered every opportunity they'd given me. They spoke to me the way you'd speak to a child who couldn't quite understand why their crayon drawings weren't hanging in a museum. I had become an expert at playing down to their expectations. I'd perfected the art of looking slightly overwhelmed when they talked about career advancement and financial planning. I'd mastered the skill of appearing grateful when they offered unsolicited advice about getting my life together and finding stability. I could make
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
my successful, confident self so small that I practically disappeared into their narrative of who they needed me to be. The struggling younger sibling made David's moderate achievements look more impressive by comparison. My supposed failures highlighted his successes and validated their belief that hard work and traditional paths led to security while creative pursuits led to disappointment. But maintaining this double life was becoming increasingly complicated. My companies were growing too rapidly, my success too visible in certain circles. I'd been featured in Business Weekly magazine, interviewed by tech industry publications, and invited to speak at digital marketing conferences around the world. The awards were accumulating in my real office. Innovator of the Year, Digital Marketing Pioneer, Top Entrepreneur Under 40. Yet at family dinners, I was still the girl who played with computers and couldn't get her life together. The irony wasn't lost on me that David, for all his business degree credentials and management position prestige, was still essentially a middle management employee. A well-paid, respected employee with good benefits and job security, but an employee nonetheless. While I, the family disappointment, was the one actually building something substantial, creating hundreds of jobs, making strategic decisions that affected multiple industries and thousands of people's livelihoods. But they would never see it that way. In their minds, David was the success story, with his steady paycheck and suburban lifestyle, and I was the cautionary tale about what happened when you chased unrealistic dreams. Today was going to be different, though I didn't know it yet. Today, the carefully constructed walls between my two lives were about to come crashing down in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes the universe has its own sense of timing, and sometimes that timing is absolutely perfect for delivering the kind of truth that changes everything forever. The anticipation had been building for weeks. My 32nd birthday had been marked on the family calendar for months, discussed at previous gatherings, and planned with the kind of detailed coordination that the Mitchell family brought to all their celebrations. Mom had called 3 times to confirm the menu, Dad had asked twice about my favorite cake, and David had made several comments about having something special planned for the occasion. Even Jessica had mentioned picking out what she called the perfect gift for her sister-in-law, who was finally starting to mature and think about her future more seriously. But as I sat in my real home office that morning, reviewing quarterly reports that showed another record-breaking period of growth for Sterling Creative Solutions, I couldn't shake the feeling that this birthday was going to be different from all the others. Not because I was expecting any kind of recognition or celebration that matched my actual achievements, but because I was getting tired of pretending to be someone I wasn't. 8 years of playing the family failure was taking its toll on my mental health and my sense of authentic identity. The morning had started with a call from my assistant at Sterling Creative, informing me that we'd just signed another major client, a global entertainment company that wanted us to handle the digital launch of their biggest franchise in company history. The contract was worth $35 million over 2 years, larger than anything Patterson and Associates had ever handled in their entire company history. After the call, I'd sat in my home office, surrounded by awards and accolades that told the true story of my professional life, and wondered how much longer I could continue living this elaborate deception. My real home in Hillcrest Manor was a testament to what I'd actually accomplished. 6,000 square feet of custom architecture, featuring a state-of-the-art home office, a library filled with business and technology books, and a gallery wall showcasing the magazine covers, industry awards and photographs from speaking engagements that documented my real career trajectory. The house had cost $4.7 million, and I'd paid cash for it 3 years ago without affecting my investment portfolio or business operations. Yet my family thought I lived in a cramped apartment and worried about making rent. The contrast between my two lives had become so extreme that sometimes I felt like I was living in two different universes. In one universe, I was Sarah Mitchell, respected business leader, sought-after consultant, and innovative entrepreneur who was changing how companies approached digital marketing. In the other universe, I was Sarah Mitchell, the disappointing daughter who couldn't get her life together and needed family guidance to find direction and stability. As I prepared for the birthday celebration that evening, I carefully selected my costume for the performance I'd been giving for 8 years. A simple blue dress from Target, comfortable flats that looked slightly worn, and the same small silver earrings I always wore to family events. Everything about my appearance was designed to reinforce their perception of me as someone who was doing her best with limited resources and modest aspirations. I drove the old Toyota Corolla across town to Oak Street, leaving my real cars, including the Tesla Model S and the vintage Porsche, safely hidden in my garage at Hillcrest Manor. The Mitchell family home on Oak Street was exactly as I remembered it from childhood, a modest 3-bedroom ranch house with a well-maintained yard, and the kind of practical furnishings that reflected a lifetime of careful spending and practical choices. Dad's old recliner sat in its usual spot facing the television. Mom's collection of ceramic figurines lined the mantelpiece, and the family photos on the side table told the story of 2 children growing up, though most of the recent photos featured David's achievements and family milestones. I arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, the designated start time that had been confirmed multiple times in family phone calls. The driveway held the usual collection of vehicles: Dad's 10-year-old pickup truck, Mom's practical sedan, David's leased BMW that he washed every weekend, and Uncle Mark's insurance company vehicle with the Thompson Insurance Agency logo on the side. I parked my Toyota behind them, the modest car fitting perfectly with the family's middle-class aesthetic and reinforcing the image of someone who was just getting by financially. Part 2, The Promise of Transformation. The moment I walked through the front door of my childhood home, I could sense something was different about tonight's gathering. There was an undercurrent of excitement in the air, a barely contained energy that seemed to vibrate through the familiar rooms. Mom greeted me with her usual warm hug, but there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. A mixture of anticipation and nervousness that made me wonder what exactly they had planned for this birthday celebration. "Sarah, honey, you look lovely," she said, though I caught the familiar undertone of maternal concern that always accompanied her compliments. "We have such a wonderful evening planned for you. Your father has been so excited about tonight, and David has been working on something special for weeks." The mention of David working on something special for weeks immediately put me on alert. My brother's version of special usually involved some form of condescension wrapped in the guise of helpful guidance. Over the years, his birthday gifts to me had included self-help books about finding direction in life, career counseling sessions with his friends, and even a subscription to a job-hunting website that he'd presented as a thoughtful investment in my future. As we moved into the living room, I noticed that the usual birthday decorations were more elaborate than typical for our family gatherings. Silver and blue streamers hung from the ceiling, matching balloons were clustered in every corner, and the dining room table was set with Mom's good china, the pieces she usually reserved for major holidays and special occasions. Whatever they had planned for tonight, they were treating it as a significant event, which made my stomach tighten with apprehension. Dad emerged from the kitchen wearing his best casual shirt, the one he typically saved for church services and important family photographs. His face lit up when he saw me, and he opened his arms for one of his characteristic bear hugs that had comforted me through childhood disappointments and adolescent struggles. "There's our birthday girl," he said with genuine warmth, though I noticed his eyes held the same mysterious excitement I'd detected in Mom's expression. "We've been looking forward to this evening for so long," he continued, his voice carrying a weight that seemed disproportionate to a simple family birthday dinner. "Tonight is going to be very special, Sarah, very special indeed." The repetition of the word special was beginning to feel ominous rather than promising. In my experience, when my family described something as special, it usually meant they'd devised some new way to highlight my shortcomings while appearing to celebrate my existence. But there was something different about their demeanor tonight, an energy that felt more anticipatory than patronizing. David appeared in the doorway leading from the kitchen, and I was struck immediately by how formally he was dressed for what was supposed to be a casual family dinner. He wore a crisp white shirt with a tie, dress pants and shoes that looked like they'd been polished specifically for this occasion. His hair was styled with more care than usual, and he carried himself with the kind of self-importance that typically preceded one of his lectures about responsibility and life choices. Sarah, he said, approaching me with a smile that managed to be both warm and somehow calculating. Happy birthday, little sister. This is going to be a night you'll remember for the rest of your life. Jessica followed behind him, looking equally formal in a dress that I recognized as one of her more expensive pieces, the kind she usually wore to David's company events or important social functions. She carried herself with the graceful confidence of someone who knew she looked perfect and was comfortable being the center of attention. Happy birthday, Sarah, she said, leaning in for an air kiss that barely made contact with my cheek. We're all so excited about tonight's surprise. The word surprise sent a chill down my spine. In my family's vocabulary, surprises had historically ranged from interventions disguised as celebrations to elaborate setups designed to motivate me toward what they considered more appropriate life choices. Last year's birthday surprise had been a meeting with one of David's colleagues who specialized in career transitions, presented as a networking opportunity, but clearly intended as a professional intervention. Uncle Mark and Aunt Carol arrived shortly after me, both dressed more formally than I'd seen them outside of weddings and funerals. Uncle Mark's insurance agency had been moderately successful over the years, providing him with a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, and the kind of steady income that my parents viewed as the pinnacle of practical achievement. He greeted me with his usual jovial enthusiasm, but I noticed his eyes held the same secretive excitement that seemed to be infecting everyone else. Sarah, my dear, he said, clapping me on the shoulder with the hearty affection of someone who'd watched me grow up. Tonight is going to be quite an evening. Quite an evening indeed. I have a feeling this birthday is going to mark a real turning point in your life. Aunt Carol nodded enthusiastically, her smile bright, but somehow mysterious. We've all been so excited about tonight, she added. It's wonderful when families can come together to celebrate new beginnings and fresh starts. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, our longtime family friend, who had been attending our celebrations for as long as I could remember, was the last to arrive. She taught both David and me in Sunday school years ago, and had maintained a maternal interest in our lives ever since. Tonight she seemed almost giddy with anticipation, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an energy that suggested she was privy to whatever secret everyone else was keeping. Sarah, sweetheart, she said, embracing me with unusual enthusiasm. You look wonderful. Are you ready for your big surprise? The repeated mentions of surprises and special evenings were beginning to feel like psychological preparation for something significant. As we gathered in the living room for the traditional pre-dinner conversation, I noticed that everyone seemed to be watching me with unusual intensity, as if they were waiting for something specific to happen or studying my reactions for future reference. Dad cleared his throat with the kind of deliberate authority he used when he had important announcements to make. Before we sit down for dinner, he said, his voice carrying a formality that seemed out of place for a family gathering, we want Sarah to know that tonight is about more than just celebrating another year of life. Tonight is about celebrating new possibilities and exciting developments. Mom nodded eagerly, her hands clasped together in front of her chest in a gesture that suggested barely contained excitement. We've been planning this for so long, she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Everything is going to be different after tonight, Sarah. Everything. The way she emphasized the word everything made my pulse quicken with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Whatever they had planned for this evening, it was clearly something they considered monumentally important, significant enough to warrant this level of formal preparation and collective anticipation. David stepped forward, assuming his familiar role as the family spokesperson for important matters. Sarah, he began, his voice taking on the kind of serious tone he used for his most important business presentations. We've been watching you struggle for years, trying to find your place in the world, working so hard to make something of yourself with your computer projects and freelance work. I felt my stomach clench as he continued, recognizing the beginning of what sounded like another intervention disguised as a celebration. But there was something different about his tone tonight, less condescending than usual and more genuinely emotional. We know it hasn't been easy, he continued, living in that small apartment, worrying about making ends meet, trying to build something meaningful from nothing. We've all admired your persistence, even when we've worried about your choices. Jessica nodded supportively, her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap as she prepared to participate in whatever presentation they'd rehearsed for this occasion. We've all wanted to help, she added, but we've never known quite how to support your dreams without interfering in your independence. The mention of my dreams caught me off guard. For years my family had dismissed my work as playing with computers or wasting time on unrealistic pursuits. The idea that they had been secretly admiring my persistence, or wanting to support my dreams, was so contrary to their usual attitudes that I wondered if this was some elaborate psychological strategy designed to make their eventual advice more palatable. Uncle Mark stepped forward, his expression serious but kind. "Sarah, we've all been talking," he said, "and we've realized that maybe we haven't been as supportive as we should have been. Maybe we've been too focused on traditional definitions of success, and not enough on recognizing the value of what you've been trying to accomplish." Aunt Carol nodded enthusiastically. "We want you to know that we see how hard you've been working," she said. "All those late nights on your computer, all those clients you've been trying to help, all the effort you've put into building something of your own." Mrs. Rodriguez moved closer, her expression maternal and encouraging. "We've been praying for an opportunity to show you how much we believe in your potential," she said. "And tonight we think that opportunity has finally arrived." The collective sentiment was so different from their usual attitudes toward my work that I found myself genuinely confused about what was happening. For 8 years, they had treated my business endeavors as misguided attempts at avoiding real responsibility. The sudden shift toward recognition and support felt surreal, like I'd walked into an alternate universe where my family had completely different personalities. Dad moved to the center of the room, clearly preparing to deliver what appeared to be the main message of the evening. "Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "we want you to know that no matter what happens tonight, no matter what opportunities come your way, we are proud of you for never giving up on your dreams." The word opportunities hung in the air like a promise, suggesting that whatever surprise they had planned involved more than just family recognition. There was an implication that something concrete was going to change, something that would affect my actual circumstances rather than just my emotional relationship with the family.
"We know haven't always understood what you've been doing," Mom added, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "But we've always believed that someday, somehow, your hard work would pay off. Tonight feels like that someday has finally arrived." David stepped forward again, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Sarah, what we're trying to tell you is that sometimes the universe has ways of rewarding persistence and dedication that we can't anticipate. Sometimes opportunities come from the most unexpected places, in the most unexpected ways." Jessica nodded, her smile bright with anticipation. "Tonight is about celebrating not just your birthday but the beginning of a whole new chapter in your life. A chapter that's going to surprise everyone, including you." The build-up was becoming almost unbearable. Whatever they had planned for this evening, they were treating it as a life-changing event, something so significant that it required this level of emotional preparation and formal presentation. I found myself genuinely curious about what could possibly warrant this kind of anticipation, especially given their historical attitude toward my career choices. As we moved toward the dining room for dinner, I noticed that the table was set for one additional person beyond our usual family group. An extra place setting sat at the head of the table, complete with the good china and silver that Mom had inherited from her mother. The mysterious extra setting suggested that someone else would be joining us, someone important enough to warrant the formal table setting and the elaborate preparation that had characterized the entire evening. "Is someone else coming to dinner?" I asked, gesturing toward the additional place setting. The question seemed to energize everyone simultaneously. Dad's face lit up with barely contained excitement, Mom clapped her hands together with joy, and David's smile became so broad it seemed to transform his entire face. "That," said Dad, his voice trembling with emotion, "is part of tonight's very special surprise." Part 3. The surface reality. As we settled around the dining room table for what was clearly going to be more than a simple family birthday dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a carefully orchestrated performance. Everyone seemed to be playing a role in some elaborate production, speaking with unusual formality and watching my reactions with the intensity of directors studying an actor's performance. Mom had outdone herself with the meal preparation. The table was laden with all of my supposed favorite dishes, from the herb-crusted chicken that she remembered me enjoying as a teenager to the homemade dinner rolls that had been a staple of our family celebrations for as long as I could remember. The presentation was flawless, with serving dishes arranged with the kind of care typically reserved for holiday meals or special occasions that required impressing guests from outside the family. "Sarah, darling," Mom said as she began serving the meal, "we wanted everything to be perfect for tonight. This dinner represents so much more than just celebrating your birthday. It represents celebrating your journey and recognizing how far you've come." The phrase "how far you've come" struck me as particularly ironic, given that in their perception, I hadn't come very far at all. For 8 years, they had viewed my journey as a series of misguided choices and missed opportunities, a cautionary tale about what happened when someone rejected practical advice in favor of unrealistic dreams. The sudden shift towards celebrating my journey felt disconnected from their actual understanding of what that journey had entailed. David raised his wine glass, assuming his familiar role as the family spokesperson for important toasts. To Sarah, he began, his voice carrying the kind of reverence typically reserved for major life achievements, who has shown us all what it means to persist in the face of challenges, to keep working toward your goals even when the path isn't clear, and to maintain faith in your own vision even when others don't understand it. The toast was so contrary to his usual attitude toward my work that I found myself wondering if this was some elaborate psychological strategy designed to make me more receptive to whatever advice or opportunity they were planning to present. For years, David had been the primary voice criticizing my persistence as stubbornness and my faith in my vision as delusion. The sudden transformation into someone who admired these same qualities felt surreal. Uncle Mark nodded enthusiastically as he raised his own glass. To someone who has taught us all that success can take many different forms, he said, and that sometimes the most important achievements happen quietly behind the scenes, where not everyone can see them. The phrase "behind the scenes where not everyone can see them" felt uncomfortably close to the truth of my actual situation. For 8 years, my real achievements had indeed been happening behind the scenes, invisible to my family and unknown to the people who thought they knew me best. The coincidence of his word choice made me wonder if somehow, impossibly, they had discovered something about my real circumstances. Aunt Carol contributed her own perspective to the toast. To Sarah, who has shown us that dedication and hard work create their own rewards, even when those rewards aren't immediately visible to everyone around you. Again, the language felt eerily appropriate to my actual situation. The rewards of my work had indeed been invisible to everyone around me, hidden behind the elaborate deception I'd been maintaining for nearly a decade. The repeated references to hidden achievements and invisible success were beginning to make me genuinely uncomfortable, as if somehow my carefully constructed secret was beginning to leak around the edges. As we began eating, the conversation took on the kind of reflective quality that typically characterized significant family milestones. Instead of the usual casual chatter about work, weather, and local events, everyone seemed focused on discussing my life and circumstances with unusual depth and seriousness. "Sarah," Dad said between bites of dinner, "we've been thinking a lot lately about your work and what you've been trying to accomplish. We realize that maybe we haven't always been as understanding as we should have been about your chosen path." Mom nodded emphatically. "We grew up in a different time," she added, "when success looked very specific and predictable. College, steady job, traditional career progression. We didn't always know how to support someone whose path looked different from what we expected." The admission was more honest than anything they'd said about my career in years. For the first time, they seemed to be acknowledging that their disapproval might have been based on their own limitations rather than my actual failures. The recognition felt simultaneously validating and heartbreaking, coming so many years after I'd needed to hear it. Jessica leaned forward, her expression unusually thoughtful and sincere. "I've been thinking about all the times you've talked about your clients and your projects," she said, "and I realize now that maybe we weren't really listening. We were so focused on wanting you to have security and stability that we missed the passion and dedication you were putting into your work." The word passion hit me particularly hard. For years, I'd hidden my genuine enthusiasm for my work behind a facade of casual interest and modest goals. I downplayed my achievements and minimized my ambitions to fit their expectations of what my life should look like. The idea that they were now recognizing passion in what I'd been presenting as mere survival efforts suggested that somehow my authentic self had been bleeding through despite my efforts to conceal it. David set down his fork and looked at me with an expression I rarely saw from him, something that resembled genuine respect mixed with what might have been regret. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "I've spent years focusing on traditional measures of success and dismissing anything that didn't fit those narrow definitions. I've been so concerned about you having security that I never really considered whether you might already be building something secure in your own way." The apology was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. David had never acknowledged that his constant criticism might have been unfair or that my choices might have had merit he hadn't recognized. The admission suggested a level of self-reflection that I hadn't known he was capable of, especially regarding our relationship and his treatment of my career decisions. Uncle Mark contributed his own perspective on the evolving family understanding of my situation. "You know, Sarah," he said, "I've been in business for 25 years, and I've learned that some of the most successful people are the ones who work quietly, building something solid without needing constant recognition or validation from others." The phrase "working quietly, building something solid" felt like a direct description of what I'd actually been doing for the past 8 years. The coincidence was becoming too consistent to ignore. Either my family had developed an unusually accurate, intuitive understanding of my hidden circumstances, or something had happened to give them actual information about my real situation. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled warmly as she contributed to the conversation. "I've always believed that hard work and dedication create their own opportunities," she said. "Sometimes those opportunities come from the most unexpected directions, but they come when we're ready for them." The mention of opportunities coming from unexpected directions aligned perfectly with the mysterious anticipation that had been building throughout the evening. Everyone seemed to be preparing me for some kind of revelation or opportunity that was going to change my circumstances in ways I couldn't yet understand. As the main course concluded and Mom began clearing dishes in preparation for dessert, I noticed that everyone kept glancing toward the clock on the dining room wall. It was nearly 8:30, and there seemed to be some significance to the time that I wasn't aware of. The mysterious extra place setting remained unused, but no one seemed concerned about the missing guest, suggesting that whoever was supposed to occupy that seat was expected to arrive at a specific time. "Sarah," Dad said as Mom disappeared into the kitchen to retrieve the birthday cake, "before we continue with the traditional birthday celebration, there's something we need to tell you. Something that's going to explain why tonight has felt different from our usual family gatherings." David nodded seriously. "What we're about to share with you is going to change everything," he said. "It's going to change how you see yourself, how you see your future, and how you understand your place in the world." The dramatic language was beginning to make me genuinely nervous. Whatever revelation they were building toward, they clearly considered it monumentally significant, important enough to warrant this elaborate preparation and emotional buildup. I found myself wondering what they could possibly have discovered or arranged that would justify this level of anticipation. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand with uncharacteristic warmth. "We want you to know that no matter how surprised you might be by what we're about to tell you, we love you and we're proud of you exactly as you are." The reassurance felt ominous rather than comforting, suggesting that whatever surprise they had planned might be shocking or overwhelming in ways that required emotional preparation. The repeated emphasis on change and transformation was making me increasingly uncomfortable, especially given my own secrets and the elaborate deception I'd been maintaining about my real circumstances. Mom returned from the kitchen carrying an elaborate birthday cake, decorated with silver candles and intricate frosting designs that must have taken hours to create. The cake was far more elaborate than anything she'd ever made for previous birthdays, another indication that tonight was being treated as an extraordinarily special occasion. "Before we sing happy birthday," she said, setting the cake down in front of me, "we want you to make a wish. But not just any wish. We want you to wish for something big, something that represents the kind of future you've always dreamed of, but maybe never thought was possible." The instruction to wish for something I'd never thought was possible felt loaded with meaning, as if they knew something about my actual dreams and aspirations that I'd never shared with them. For years I'd been careful to present modest goals and realistic expectations, hiding my actual ambitions and achievements behind a facade of humble hopes and practical concerns. As I prepared to blow out the candles, Uncle Mark raised his hand to get everyone's attention. "Before Sarah makes her wish," he said, "I think she should know that sometimes wishes come true in ways we never expected, from sources we never imagined." Aunt Carol nodded enthusiastically. "Sometimes the universe has plans for us that are bigger than anything we could dream for ourselves," she added. The philosophical language about the universe having plans felt increasingly mysterious and significant. As I looked around the table at their expectant faces, I realized that whatever was about to happen had been carefully planned and orchestrated. This wasn't a spontaneous family celebration, but a deliberate event designed to lead to some specific revelation or announcement. Just as I was about to blow out the candles, the doorbell rang. The sound seemed to electrify everyone at the table. Dad jumped up with obvious excitement. Mom clapped her hands together with joy, and David's smile became so broad it seemed to transform his entire face. "That," said Dad, his voice trembling with anticipation, "is our very special guest." Part 4. The hidden reality. As Dad moved toward the front door with obvious excitement, I felt my stomach tighten with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The doorbell's timing seemed too perfect to be coincidental, arriving at precisely the moment when my family's mysterious buildup had reached its peak intensity. Whatever was about to happen had clearly been planned down to the minute, orchestrated with the kind of precision that suggested something far more significant than a typical family celebration. The sound of the front door opening was followed by muffled conversation in the hallway, voices that I couldn't quite identify but that seemed to energize my family members even further. David was practically vibrating with excitement. Jessica was smoothing her dress and checking her appearance, as if preparing to meet someone important, and Mom was wiping her hands nervously on her apron, while watching the doorway with intense anticipation. When Dad returned to the dining room, he was accompanied by a man I didn't recognize, but who immediately commanded attention through his mere presence. Tall and distinguished, probably in his early 60s, he wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that spoke of wealth and refinement. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his bearing confident and authoritative, and everything about his appearance suggested someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. "Sarah," Dad said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I'd like you to meet William Sterling." The name hit me like a physical blow. William Sterling was one of the most successful businessmen on the West Coast, the founder and CEO of Sterling Industries, a diversified conglomerate that had built an empire spanning technology, real estate, manufacturing, and entertainment. His net worth was estimated in the billions, his business acumen legendary, and his influence extending far beyond the corporate world into philanthropy, politics, and cultural institutions. What Dad didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that William Sterling was also one of my most important business associates. Sterling Creative Solutions had been handling digital marketing campaigns for several of his companies for the past 3 years. We'd worked together on product launches, brand revitalization projects, and strategic digital transformations that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue for his various enterprises. More significantly, William Sterling had become something of a mentor to me in the business world. He'd been one of the first major clients to recognize the innovative approach that Sterling Creative brought to digital marketing, and his endorsement had opened doors to other Fortune 500 accounts that had transformed my company from a regional success story into a national powerhouse. But there was something even more significant about William Sterling's presence in my family's dining room, something that my family was about to discover but that I had known for years. Something that explained why a billionaire would appear at a middle-class family birthday party in Riverside Valley, and why his arrival had been orchestrated with such careful timing and elaborate preparation. William Sterling smiled warmly as he approached the table, his presence somehow making our modest dining room feel smaller and more intimate. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from decades of commanding boardrooms and making decisions that affect thousands of people. "It's wonderful to finally meet you in this context. I've been looking forward to this moment for a very long time." The phrase "finally meet you in this context" suggested that he knew me from some other context, which should have been impossible given my family's understanding of my circumstances. They believed I was a struggling freelance designer who barely made ends meet, someone who could never have had any interaction with a billionaire businessman like William Sterling. Dad beamed with pride as he gestured toward the empty chair at the head of the table. "Sterling, please, sit down. We can't thank you enough for coming here tonight, for making this evening so special for our daughter." As William Sterling took his seat, I noticed that my family members were watching him with the kind of reverence typically reserved for celebrities or religious figures. Uncle Mark seemed barely able to contain his excitement. Aunt Carol was smoothing her hair and adjusting her posture as if preparing for a photograph, and Mrs. Rodriguez was staring with open amazement at having someone of his stature in our modest family home. "The pleasure is entirely mine," William Sterling replied, his attention focused primarily on me. "This evening represents the culmination of something very important, something that I've been hoping to make happen for quite some time." David leaned forward eagerly, clearly desperate to understand the connection between this billionaire businessman and his supposedly unsuccessful sister. Mr. Sterling, we're all so grateful that you've taken an interest in Sarah's situation. When your people contacted us about tonight, we could hardly believe it. The phrase "when your people contacted us" sent shockwaves through my understanding of what was happening. William Sterling's staff had initiated contact with my family, which meant this evening hadn't been planned by my relatives, but had been orchestrated by one of the most powerful businessmen in California. The implications were staggering, and completely beyond anything I could have anticipated. William Sterling nodded seriously. Sarah's situation is indeed quite remarkable, he said, though perhaps not in the way that most people understand it. What I'm here to discuss tonight will likely surprise everyone in this room, including Sarah herself. Mom moved to the kitchen and returned with an extra place setting for William Sterling, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged the china and silver with obvious nervousness. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "we want you to know how honored we are to have you in our home. We've read about your business achievements, your charitable work, your influence in so many different areas. For someone like you to take a personal interest in our daughter is beyond anything we could have imagined." The word personal seemed to carry special significance for William Sterling. He smiled in a way that suggested he knew something about the nature of his interest in me that my family didn't yet understand. "My interest in Sarah is indeed deeply personal," he said, "for reasons that will become clear very shortly." Jessica couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "Mr. Sterling, if you don't mind my asking, how did you learn about Sarah? How did you come to know about her work and her circumstances?" William Sterling's expression became thoughtful and somewhat emotional. "I've known about Sarah for much longer than she realizes," he said. "In fact, I've been aware of her existence and following her progress for most of her adult life." The statement was so unexpected that I found myself genuinely confused about what he could possibly mean. While we had worked together professionally for several years, he had never indicated any personal knowledge of my background or family circumstances. Our business relationship, while highly successful and mutually beneficial, had been strictly professional. Dad looked puzzled but hopeful. "You've been following her progress?" he asked. "But how?" "Sarah's been working as a freelance designer, doing small projects here and there. How would someone in your position know about that kind of work?" William Sterling's smile became warmer and more personal. "Robert," he said, using my father's first name with casual familiarity, "what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you understand everything about Sarah's life and circumstances. What I'm about to reveal will explain why I'm here tonight, and why this evening represents such an important milestone." The dramatic language was beginning to make me genuinely uncomfortable. Whatever William Sterling was planning to announce, it was clearly something that would affect my carefully maintained double life, and potentially expose the elaborate deception I'd been maintaining with my family for 8 years. Uncle Mark leaned forward, with obvious fascination. "Mr. Sterling, we're all eager to understand the connection. Sarah has been working so hard for so many years, trying to build something with her computer skills and design work. If there's some opportunity or recognition that you're here to offer, we couldn't be more thrilled for her." William Sterling's expression became more serious, as he prepared to make what was clearly going to be a significant announcement. "What I'm here to offer," he said, "is not an opportunity or recognition in the traditional sense. What I'm here to offer is the truth about who Sarah really is, and what she's actually accomplished." The phrase "the truth about who Sarah really is" sent a chill down my spine. William Sterling was about to reveal something about my real circumstances, but I couldn't understand why or how he had become involved in my family relationships. Our business association had never extended into personal territory, and I had been scrupulously careful to keep my professional and family lives completely separate. Mom looked confused but hopeful. "The truth about who Sarah really is," she repeated. "Mr. Sterling, we know our daughter. We know she's been struggling to establish herself, working hard to build something meaningful with her skills and talents." William Sterling's smile became almost paternal as he looked around the table at my family members. "Linda," he said, using my mother's first name with the same casual familiarity he'd shown with Dad, "what you know about Sarah represents only a small fraction of who she actually is, and what she's accomplished. The woman sitting at this table tonight is not struggling to establish herself. She's already established herself as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in California." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything my family believed about my life and circumstances. David's face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been panic. Jessica's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly as she tried to process what she'd just heard. "Mr. Sterling," David said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion. Sarah works as a freelance graphic designer. She lives in a small apartment and drives an old car. She's been working hard to build her business, but she's not what anyone would call established or successful." William Sterling's laugh was warm but knowing. "David," he said, "your sister has been working hard to build her business, that much is true. But what you don't know is that she succeeded beyond anything you could imagine. The woman you think of as struggling to make ends meet is actually the founder and CEO of one of the most influential digital marketing companies on the West Coast." The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Uncle Mark's wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. Aunt Carol's mouth fell open in shock, and Mrs. Rodriguez crossed herself as if she'd witnessed a miracle. Dad stared at William Sterling with complete bewilderment. "That's impossible," he said weakly. "We would know, Sarah would have told us." William Sterling's expression became more serious as he prepared to deliver what was clearly going to be the most significant part of his announcement. "Robert," he said gently, "what you're about to learn tonight is that Sarah has been protecting all of you from the truth about her success, for reasons that are both deeply personal and completely understandable." He turned to look directly at me, his eyes holding a mixture of respect and something else that I couldn't quite identify. "But there's something even more significant that needs to be revealed tonight," he continued. "Something that explains not just why I know about Sarah's professional success, but why I've been following her progress so closely for so many years." The way he emphasized something even more significant made my heart race with anticipation and dread. Whatever William Sterling was about to reveal, it was going to be more shocking than my hidden business success, more personal than my professional achievements, and more life-changing than anything my family could have prepared themselves to hear. "Sarah," he said, his voice becoming emotionally charged, "the reason I've been following your progress, the reason I've been aware of your achievements, and the reason I'm here tonight is because you're not just a successful businesswoman that I admire from a distance." He paused, looking around the table at my family's stunned faces before delivering the words that would change everything forever. "Sarah Mitchell is my daughter." Part 5. The Origin of Deception. The silence that followed William Sterling's announcement was so complete that it seemed to drain all sound from the universe. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence, impossible to ignore but equally impossible to immediately comprehend. Every person at the table seemed frozen in place, their faces reflecting various stages of shock, disbelief, and desperate attempts to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about our family. My own reaction was perhaps the most complex of all. While my family struggled to understand how this revelation could possibly be true, I was dealing with the knowledge that William Sterling had just confirmed something I had discovered 3 years ago, but had never found the courage to act upon. The truth he was revealing to my family was not news to me, but rather the culmination of a long and painful journey of discovery that had begun when I'd started researching my own background as part of a routine security clearance process for a major government contract. The investigation had revealed discrepancies in my birth records, inconsistencies that had led me to hire a private investigator who had ultimately uncovered the truth about my biological parentage. Robert and Linda Mitchell were indeed my parents, but only through adoption. My biological father was William Sterling, one of the most powerful businessmen in California, and my birth mother had been a young woman named Catherine Monroe, who had worked briefly as his personal assistant 32 years ago. Learning this information had been devastating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because I loved my adoptive parents any less, but because it explained so many aspects of my personality and capabilities that had always seemed inconsistent with my family environment. My entrepreneurial instincts, my natural understanding of business strategy, my ability to navigate complex financial and organizational challenges, all of these traits suddenly made sense in the context of my biological heritage. But what had made the discovery even more complicated was learning that William Sterling had no knowledge of my existence. Catherine Monroe had left her position at Sterling Industries shortly after discovering her pregnancy, and had arranged the adoption through a private agency without ever informing my biological father that he had become a parent. She had died in a car accident when I was 6 months old, taking the secret of my paternity with her to the grave. For 3 years I had carried this knowledge alone, unsure how to process the implications or whether to act upon the information. The discovery had come at a time when my business was experiencing explosive growth, when I was finally beginning to feel confident in my professional identity and proud of what I had accomplished independently. Learning that my biological father was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country had felt like a validation of my achievements, but also like a potential invalidation of everything I had worked to prove about my own capabilities. The ethical complexities had been overwhelming. Did I have the right to disrupt William Sterling's life with information about a child he had never known existed? Did I have an obligation to reveal my identity, or was keeping the secret a form of protecting everyone involved from potentially painful complications? And perhaps most significantly, would revealing my biological connection undermine my professional achievements by suggesting that my success was somehow predetermined by genetics rather than earned through hard work and talent? These questions had become even more complicated when Sterling Industries had approached my company for digital marketing services 3 years ago. Working with my biological father without his knowledge had created an emotional complexity that I had never fully resolved. Every successful campaign we executed together, every strategic consultation that yielded impressive results, every moment of professional recognition from someone whose genes I shared felt simultaneously meaningful and fraudulent. William Sterling had become not just a client but a mentor, someone whose business philosophy and strategic thinking resonated with my own instincts in ways that now made perfect sense. Our professional relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect and shared perspectives on innovation and market dynamics. But always underlying these interactions was the secret knowledge that our connection was far deeper than either of us officially acknowledged. The decision to reveal his identity tonight had apparently been triggered by events I was only beginning to understand. According to what William Sterling was explaining to my stunned family, he had recently learned about my existence through his own investigation into Sterling Creative Solutions. His interest in my company had evolved from professional admiration to personal curiosity when he realized that the founder shared his surname and demonstrated business instincts that seemed remarkably similar to his own. The discovery process, William Sterling was telling my family, began when I started noticing patterns in Sarah's work that seemed too sophisticated for someone with her supposed background and resources. The strategic thinking, the innovative approaches, the ability to understand complex market dynamics, all of these suggested someone with capabilities that didn't match the profile of a struggling freelance designer. Dad was staring at William Sterling with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "But we adopted Sarah when she was just a baby," he said weakly. "The agency told us that her birth parents were young people who couldn't provide for her. There was never any mention of anyone like you." William Sterling's expression became gentle but serious as he prepared to explain the circumstances that had kept us apart for over 3 decades. "Robert, what you were told was accurate as far as it went, but it wasn't the complete truth. Sarah's birth mother, Catherine Monroe, was indeed young when she became pregnant, barely 22 years old. She was working as my personal assistant at Sterling Industries, and our relationship, while brief, was genuine and meaningful. The revelation that my birth parents had been involved in a real relationship rather than a casual encounter felt significant in ways I hadn't expected. For years I had wondered about the circumstances of my conception, whether I was the result of love or merely physical attraction or something even more complicated. Learning that there had been genuine feeling between William Sterling and Catherine Monroe gave my existence a dignity that I hadn't dared to hope for. Mom was crying now, not from sadness but from what appeared to be overwhelming emotion at the magnitude of what was being revealed. "She never told you?" she asked William Sterling. "She never said anything about being pregnant." William Sterling's expression became deeply sad as he recounted the circumstances that had separated him from knowledge of my existence. Catherine left Sterling Industries quite suddenly, citing family obligations that required her to move back to her hometown. I respected her decision, though I was disappointed that our relationship was ending. I had no idea that she was pregnant, and she chose not to tell me before she left. The phrase family obligations that required her to move back to her hometown was a gentle way of describing what I knew from my private investigator's research had been a much more complicated situation.
Catherine Monroe had been raised in a conservative religious family that would have been scandalized by an unmarried pregnancy, especially one involving a prominent businessman who was already married at the time, though in the process of divorce. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "But how did you find out? How did you learn that Sarah was your daughter?" William Sterling smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth as he prepared to explain the detective work that had ultimately brought us together. "The discovery began when I started researching Sterling Creative Solutions more thoroughly. I was so impressed by the company's work that I wanted to understand more about its leadership and strategic approach. When I learned that the founder was named Sarah Mitchell and operated primarily in Riverside Valley, I began to wonder if there might be some connection to my past." Uncle Mark was frantically scrolling through his phone, presumably searching for information about Sterling Creative Solutions, his face growing paler with each screen he viewed. "My God," he whispered. "Sarah, this company, it's massive. The client list, the revenue figures, the industry recognition. You've built an empire." The word empire felt both accurate and surreal in the context of our modest family dining room. Sterling Creative Solutions had indeed grown into something that could be described as an empire, with offices in 4 states, contracts with dozens of Fortune 500 companies, and influence extending throughout the digital marketing industry. But hearing it acknowledged in front of my family for the first time made the achievement feel simultaneously more real and more dreamlike. William Sterling nodded approvingly as Uncle Mark continued to discover evidence of my professional success. "Sarah has indeed built something remarkable," he said. "But what made me suspect a deeper connection was not just the scale of her achievement, but the particular approach she took to building her business. The strategic thinking, the long-term vision, the ability to identify market opportunities that others missed, all of these reminded me strongly of my own business philosophy and methods." Aunt Carol was staring at me with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if she were seeing me for the first time. "Sarah," she said slowly, "if this is all true, if you've really built this kind of business, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling when you were actually more successful than any of us?" The question was one I had been dreading for years, knowing that eventually I would have to explain the psychological and emotional factors that had led me to maintain such an elaborate deception. The truth was complicated, involving family dynamics, personal insecurity, and a complex mixture of pride and shame that had made honesty feel more dangerous than deception. "The deception began," I said carefully, "because I was afraid that if you knew about my success, it would change how you saw me and how you treated me. I was afraid that my achievements would be attributed to luck or circumstances rather than my own work and intelligence." David was staring at me with an expression that cycled between amazement and something that might have been wounded pride. "But Sarah," he said, "we're your family. We would have been proud of you. We would have celebrated your success." The statement was well-intentioned, but revealed exactly the kind of misunderstanding I had been trying to avoid. David's assumption that they would have celebrated my success ignored the years of criticism and dismissal that had preceded my achievements. The family's attitude toward my unconventional choices had been so consistently negative that I had learned to protect my genuine accomplishments from their judgment and skepticism. William Sterling seemed to understand the family dynamics more clearly than my relatives did. "Sarah's caution was entirely understandable," he said, diplomatically. "When someone achieves success through unconventional methods, especially in industries that their family doesn't understand, it can be easier to maintain privacy than to constantly defend and explain their choices." Mrs. Rodriguez was shaking her head in amazement, clearly struggling to reconcile the modest young woman she thought she knew with the successful entrepreneur who was being revealed. "Sarah, all those times you came to family gatherings, all those conversations where we worried about your future and offered advice about finding stability, you were already more successful than all of us combined." The phrase "more successful than all of us combined" felt both accurate and somehow diminishing to the people I loved. While it was true that my business achievements exceeded their combined financial accomplishments, success could be measured in many different ways, and my family had achieved meaningful things in their own right. Dad's 30 years of reliable postal service had provided stability for thousands of families. Mom's teaching career had shaped hundreds of young minds. Their success might not have been measured in dollars, but it had been real and valuable. "Success takes many forms," I said, trying to acknowledge their contributions while explaining my own path. What I built professionally doesn't diminish what all of you have accomplished in your own lives and careers. William Sterling nodded approvingly at my diplomatic response, then continued with his explanation of how he had ultimately confirmed my identity. Once I suspected that Sarah might be connected to me personally, I hired investigators to research her background more thoroughly. What they discovered was that Sarah Mitchell had been adopted as an infant, and that her birth mother had been Catherine Monroe. The mention of Catherine Monroe's name seemed to carry special emotional weight for William Sterling. His expression became soft and nostalgic, suggesting that his feelings for my birth mother had been deeper and more lasting than a casual workplace relationship. Catherine was extraordinary, he continued, his voice becoming reflective. Intelligent, creative, intuitive about business in ways that reminded me of myself at that age. When she left Sterling Industries, I assumed it was because she had found better opportunities elsewhere. I never imagined that she was carrying my child. Dad looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation being revealed. So you've known about Sarah for how long? He asked. I confirmed my suspicions about 6 months ago, William Sterling replied. Since then I've been trying to decide how to approach the situation appropriately. I wanted to respect Sarah's privacy and her relationship with your family, but I also felt that both of us deserved to know the truth about our connection. The phrase "both of us deserve to know the truth" suggested that William Sterling had been experiencing his own emotional complexity about our relationship. Learning that he had a daughter he'd never known existed must have been as psychologically challenging for him as learning about my biological parentage had been for me. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin, her emotional state clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being revealed. Mr. Sterling, she said, we want you to know that we love Sarah completely and unconditionally. She's our daughter in every way that matters, and nothing about her biological parentage changes that. William Sterling's expression became deeply moved by Mom's statement. Linda, he said, I want you to know that I have no intention of disrupting the family relationships that Sarah has built with all of you. What I'm hoping for is the opportunity to add to those relationships, not to replace them. The phrase "add to those relationships" rather than "replace them" felt like the most important thing William Sterling could have said. The idea that acknowledging our biological connection didn't have to threaten my relationship with the people who had raised me was something I had worried about for 3 years. Jessica was still scrolling through information about Sterling Creative Solutions on her phone, her expression growing more amazed with each new discovery. Sarah, she said, there are articles here about your charitable giving. Millions of dollars donated to education and entrepreneurship programs. You've been helping other people start their own businesses. The mention of my charitable activities felt particularly meaningful in the context of family recognition. For years I had been making anonymous donations to causes I cared about, funding scholarships and business development programs that helped other people achieve their own entrepreneurial dreams. Having that aspect of my work acknowledged felt almost more validating than recognition of my business success. William Sterling smiled with obvious pride as he learned about my philanthropic activities. That doesn't surprise me at all, he said. Giving back to the community has always been a priority for Sterling Industries. It seems that Sarah inherited more than just business instincts. The word inherited felt loaded with implications about nature versus nurture, genetics versus environment. While my adoptive family had certainly influenced my values and character development, there was something compelling about discovering that my philanthropic instincts aligned with those of my biological father. Uncle Mark was still exploring articles about my company, his amazement growing with each new piece of information he discovered. Sarah, he said, according to this industry publication, you've been named one of the most influential entrepreneurs under 40 in California. There are quotes here from other business leaders praising your innovative approaches and strategic vision. The industry recognition felt particularly meaningful coming from Uncle Mark, whose own business success had always been respected within our family. Having someone whose judgment they trusted validate my professional achievements seemed to carry more weight than simple financial measurements. Aunt Carol was looking at me with an expression that seemed to be reevaluating everything she thought she knew about my capabilities and character. Sarah, she said slowly, if you've accomplished all of this, if you've built this kind of business empire, then you're not just successful. You're extraordinary. The word extraordinary felt both gratifying and somehow uncomfortable. For 8 years I had been working to prove my worth while simultaneously hiding the evidence of that worth from the people whose opinions mattered most to me. Having my achievements finally acknowledged felt like validation, but also like the end of a long period of self-protection that had become psychologically comfortable.
As the conversation continued, I realized that William Sterling's revelation had accomplished something I had been unable to do myself for nearly a decade. By revealing both my biological parentage and my business success simultaneously, he had created a context in which my family could understand my achievements as neither accidental nor threatening, but as the natural expression of inherited capabilities combined with their own influence on my character and values. The truth was finally emerging, but in ways I had never anticipated, and through circumstances I could never have planned. My family was learning not just about my hidden success, but about the complex biological and emotional factors that had shaped both my capabilities and my choices about how to reveal them. The evening was far from over, and I knew that there would be difficult conversations ahead about trust, honesty, and the future of our relationships. But for the first time in 8 years, I felt the possibility of living authentically with the people I loved most, without the exhausting effort of maintaining an elaborate deception or the fear that my success would somehow diminish their love for me. William Sterling looked around the table at my family's stunned faces, then turned to me with an expression that combined paternal pride with something that might have been hope. "Sarah," he said, "I know this evening has been overwhelming for everyone, but I was hoping that now that the truth is finally out, we might have the opportunity to build the father-daughter relationship that we've missed for the past 32 years. The invitation hung in the air like a bridge between my past and my future, between the life I had built in secret and the life I might now be able to live openly. For the first time since William Sterling had walked through our front door, I felt ready to respond with complete honesty about my own hopes and fears. "I would like that very much," I said, my voice carrying more emotion than I had intended. "I've known about our connection for 3 years, and I've been hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity." The admission that I had known about our biological relationship for 3 years created another wave of shock around the table, but this time the surprise seemed mixed with understanding rather than pure bewilderment. My family was beginning to comprehend the emotional complexity I had been navigating. The difficult balance between loyalty to them and curiosity about my biological heritage. The evening was about to take another dramatic turn, but for now, the most important truths had been revealed. My family knew about my business success. They understood my biological connection to one of the most powerful men in
California, and they were beginning to understand the psychological factors that had made honesty feel impossible until this moment. The deception that had defined my adult life was finally ending, replaced by the possibility of authentic relationships built on complete truth rather than protective fiction. Whether my family could adapt to this new reality remained to be seen, but at least now we would all be working from the same set of facts about who I really was and what I had actually accomplished. The silence that followed my admission about knowing William Sterling's identity for 3 years was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted his initial revelation. This was a contemplative silence, filled with the sound of mental gears turning as my family processed not just the facts they had learned, but the emotional journey I had been on while keeping these monumental secrets from them. David was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of hurt and understanding that I had rarely heard from him before. "Sarah," he said slowly, "you've been carrying all of this alone for 3 years. The knowledge about your biological father, the success of your business, the weight of keeping these secrets from all of us." The question touched on something I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. The psychological burden of maintaining multiple deceptions simultaneously had been enormous, requiring constant vigilance and emotional compartmentalization that had affected every aspect of my life. Living authentically had become impossible when so much of my energy was devoted to remembering which version of myself to present in different contexts. It wasn't easy, I admitted, feeling the relief of finally being able to speak honestly about the emotional toll of the past several years. There were times when I wanted to tell all of you everything, but I was afraid of how it would change our relationships. I was afraid that knowing about my success would make you see me differently, and I was afraid that learning about my biological parentage would make you feel like I was rejecting the family that raised me. Mom reached across the table and took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring in a way that reminded me why I had been so afraid of losing their love. "Sweetheart," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks, "nothing could ever make us love you less. You're our daughter, and you always will be, no matter what we learn about your biological background or your professional achievements." The unconditional acceptance in her voice was exactly what I had been hoping to hear but had been too afraid to trust. For years I had convinced myself that their love was conditional on their perception of me as someone who needed their guidance and support. The idea that they could love me as a successful independent adult felt almost too good to believe.
William Sterling watched this family interaction with obvious emotion, his expression suggesting that he understood the delicate dynamics he had disrupted by revealing the truth. I hope everyone understands that my intention tonight was not to create division or confusion within this family, he said. My goal was to create an opportunity for honesty and authentic relationships moving forward. Dad looked at William Sterling with an expression that seemed to be evolving from shock towards something that might eventually become acceptance. Mr. Sterling, he said, I need you to understand that Sarah is our daughter in every way that matters to us. We raised her, we love her, and we're proud of her regardless of her biological parentage or her business achievements. The protective tone in Dad's voice was something I hadn't heard since I was a child, and it reminded me that despite their criticisms and misunderstandings over the years, my parents had always seen themselves as my defenders against the world. Their reaction to William Sterling's presence was not jealousy or resentment but a parental instinct to protect their child from potential emotional harm. William Sterling nodded respectfully at Dad's statement. Robert, I completely understand your feelings, and I want to assure you that I have no desire to compete with or replace the relationship you've built with Sarah. What I'm hoping for is the opportunity to add a new dimension to her family connections, not to diminish the existing ones. Jessica was still scrolling through articles about Sterling Creative Solutions, her amazement growing with each new piece of information she discovered. Sarah, she said, I'm reading about the employee wellness program you implemented across all your companies. Free healthcare, mental health support, child care assistance, educational reimbursement. You've created one of the most progressive workplace environments in the industry. The recognition of my company's employee benefits felt particularly meaningful because it represented values that my family had instilled in me during my childhood. The importance of treating people fairly, of using success to help others, and of building something meaningful beyond just financial gain were all principles I had learned at our family dinner table. Those programs reflect the values you all taught me, I said, looking around the table at my family members. The business success might be mine, but the moral foundation for how I use that success came from growing up in this family. Uncle Mark was exploring a different aspect of my business empire, his expression growing more impressed with each discovery. Sarah, he said, I'm looking at the expansion timeline for Sterling Creative Solutions. You've opened new offices in 4 different states over the past 2 years. The job creation statistics are remarkable. You've provided employment for over 300 people. The phrase job creation felt particularly significant coming from Uncle Mark, whose own business had provided steady employment for a dozen people over the years. Having someone whose entrepreneurial efforts I had always respected acknowledge the scale of my employment impact made the achievement feel more real and more valuable. Aunt Carol was examining information about my charitable foundation, her voice filled with amazement as she read aloud from her phone screen. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Entrepreneurial Education has provided scholarships to over 200 young women pursuing business degrees. Sarah, you've literally changed hundreds of lives through your educational giving. The mention of my scholarship program felt especially meaningful because it represented my attempt to address the gender disparities I had observed in business school and throughout my career. By providing financial support specifically for women pursuing entrepreneurial education, I had been trying to create opportunities for others that I had been fortunate enough to create for myself. William Sterling smiled with obvious pride as he learned about my philanthropic activities. Sarah, I had no idea about the scope of your charitable giving. Sterling Industries has always prioritized community investment, but what you've accomplished with your foundation is remarkable for someone at any stage of their career. The comparison to Sterling Industries' philanthropic efforts felt like validation from someone whose business judgment I had come to respect deeply over our 3 years of professional collaboration. Hearing him acknowledge my charitable work as remarkable rather than expected or obligatory made the efforts feel more significant. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the revelations throughout the evening, finally spoke up with the kind of moral authority that came from decades of community involvement. Sarah, she said, what you've accomplished professionally is impressive, but what moves me most is learning that success hasn't changed your heart. You're still the generous, caring person we've always known, just with more resources to help others. The phrase success hasn't changed your heart touched on one of my deepest fears about revealing my achievements to my family. I had been worried that they would see my business success as evidence that I had become someone different, someone harder or more calculating than the person they had raised. Learning that they could recognize continuity between my childhood character and my adult achievements felt like a form of validation I hadn't known I needed. David was studying his phone with an expression that seemed to be cycling through multiple emotions simultaneously. "Sarah," he said, "I'm reading about the digital marketing campaign you designed for Riverside Valley's downtown revitalization project. You donated your services to help local businesses recover from the economic downturn. You've been helping our own community while we thought you were struggling to survive." The mention of my work with local Riverside Valley businesses felt particularly poignant because it represented my attempt to give back to the community where I had grown up, even while hiding my success from my own family. The downtown revitalization project had been close to my heart because it affected places and people I had known since childhood. The community that supported me growing up deserved support in return, I said simply. Success that doesn't benefit the people around you feels hollow and meaningless. William Sterling's expression suggested that my comment about community responsibility aligned with his own business philosophy. That perspective on social responsibility is exactly what I would hope to see from someone in your position, he said. Using success to lift others rather than just accumulating wealth for its own sake. As the evening continued, I began to realize that my family's reaction to my revelations was evolving beyond simple shock towards something that resembled genuine pride and understanding. They were beginning to see my achievements not as evidence that I had become someone foreign to them, but as proof that the values they had instilled in me had found expression in ways they hadn't expected or recognized. Dad cleared his throat with the kind of deliberate authority he used when he had something important to say. "Sarah," he began, "I owe you an apology. We all do. For years we've been treating you like someone who needed our guidance and protection, when you were actually building something extraordinary that we were too narrow-minded to recognize." The apology felt more meaningful than I had expected, not because I had been consciously seeking their acknowledgement, but because it represented their willingness to reconsider their own assumptions and biases. The admission that their treatment of me had been based on misunderstanding rather than accurate assessment felt like a form of justice I hadn't dared to hope for. Mom nodded emphatically, her expression reflecting the kind of maternal guilt that comes from realizing you've underestimated your own child. "We were so focused on wanting you to have security and stability that we couldn't see that you had already achieved both, just not in the traditional ways we expected." William Sterling observed this family reconciliation with obvious satisfaction, suggesting that facilitating this conversation had been one of his goals for the evening. "What I've witnessed tonight," he said, "is exactly the kind of family dynamics that produce successful, caring, responsible adults. Sarah's achievements reflect the foundation you provided for her, even if the specific manifestation of those achievements wasn't what you anticipated." Jessica set down her phone and looked at me with an expression that seemed to be reevaluating everything she thought she knew about our relationship. "Sarah," she said, "I need to apologize for all the times I've offered you advice about finding direction in your life. I was presuming to guide someone who was already more accomplished than I could imagine." The phrase "more accomplished than I could imagine" felt both validating and somehow uncomfortable. While I appreciated the recognition of my achievements, I didn't want my business success to create a hierarchy within our family relationships that made authentic connection more difficult. "Professional accomplishment is just one measure of a meaningful life," I said carefully. "All of you have achieved important things in your own ways, and those achievements have value that can't be measured in dollars or magazine articles." Uncle Mark was examining information about Sterling Creative Solutions' expansion plans, his expression suggesting both amazement and something that might have been professional envy. "Sarah," he said, "according to this business journal, you're planning to open offices in 3 more states over the next 2 years. The projected job creation is over 500 additional positions." The mention of future expansion plans felt surreal in the context of our family dining room, where such large-scale business strategies had never been discussed or even imagined. The contrast between my public business identity and my private family role was finally dissolving, replaced by a more integrated sense of self that felt both liberating and slightly overwhelming. William Sterling leaned forward with obvious interest in the expansion discussion. "Sarah," he said, "I'd be very interested in learning more about your growth strategies. Sterling Industries has been looking for strategic partners in the digital marketing space, and what you've built with Sterling Creative Solutions suggests exactly the kind of innovative thinking we value." The possibility of collaborating with William Sterling's companies not just as an external contractor but as a strategic partner represented a level of business opportunity that exceeded anything I had imagined when I first started my company. But more significantly, it suggested that our newfound father-daughter relationship might also include professional collaboration that could benefit both our organizations. Aunt Carol was reading about my company's industry recognition, her voice filled with wonder as she discovered the scope of my professional reputation. "Sarah," she said, "you've been invited to speak at business conferences in 12 different countries. There are quotes here from CEOs of Fortune 500 companies praising your strategic insights and innovative approaches." The international recognition felt particularly meaningful because it demonstrated that my success wasn't limited to local or regional markets, but represented contributions that were valued on a global scale. Having my family learn about this level of professional respect felt like validation that went beyond simple financial measurements. As the evening progressed, I began to understand that William Sterling's decision to reveal our relationship in this family context had been strategically brilliant. By presenting my biological parentage and business success simultaneously, he had created a framework in which my family could understand my achievements as natural expressions of inherited capabilities rather than lucky accidents or evidence that I had somehow betrayed the values they had taught me. Dad looked at William Sterling with an expression that seemed to be evolving from protective suspicion toward cautious acceptance. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "I'm beginning to understand why you felt it was important to reveal this information. Sarah deserves to know about her biological heritage, and you deserve to know about the remarkable daughter you never knew you had." The phrase "remarkable daughter" felt like a healing balm for wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. For years I had been seeking recognition from my family for who I actually was rather than who they thought I should become. Hearing that recognition finally expressed felt like the resolution of a long and painful emotional journey. William Sterling's expression became deeply moved as he responded to Dad's acceptance. "Robert," he said, "I want you to know that learning about Sarah's existence has been one of the most meaningful discoveries of my life. But equally meaningful has been learning about the family that raised her and the values they instilled in her. The mutual respect between my adoptive father and biological father felt like a gift I hadn't dared to hope for. The possibility that they could acknowledge each other's importance in my life without competition or resentment suggested that my family relationships might become richer rather than more complicated as a result of tonight's revelations. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the evening's dramatic developments, stood up with the kind of ceremonial gravity that suggested she felt compelled to mark the significance of what had occurred. "I think," she said, "that we should acknowledge how extraordinary this evening has been. We've witnessed the revelation of truths that change everything we thought we knew, but we've also witnessed the power of family love to adapt and grow in response to new understanding." Her words felt like a benediction over the emotional chaos of the evening, a way of framing the night's events as transformation rather than disruption. The idea that family love could adapt and grow rather than be threatened by new information felt like the most important insight of the entire evening. As we began to clear the dinner dishes and move toward a more informal conclusion to the evening, I realized that my life had been fundamentally altered in ways that would take months or years to fully understand. The elaborate deception that had defined my adult relationships was ending, replaced by the possibility of authentic connection based on complete honesty. William Sterling approached me as the rest of the family moved toward the living room for continued conversation. "Sarah," he said, quietly, "I hope you understand that revealing our relationship tonight was not about disrupting your life, but about creating opportunities for genuine connection moving forward." The phrase "genuine connection" felt like exactly what had been missing from my relationships for the past 8 years. The exhausting effort of maintaining multiple deceptions had made authentic intimacy impossible, even with the people I loved most. The prospect of rebuilding those relationships on a foundation of complete truth felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "I understand," I said, "and I'm grateful that you had the courage to take the risk of revealing everything tonight. I've been wanting to live more authentically for years, but I couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between my public and private identities." David approached us as we concluded our private conversation, his expression suggesting that he wanted to address our sibling relationship directly. "Sarah," he said, "I need you to know that learning about your success doesn't diminish you in my eyes. If anything, it makes me realize how much I underestimated your capabilities and how much I let my own insecurities affect how I treated you." The admission represented a level of self-awareness and emotional maturity from David that I had never experienced before. The possibility that our relationship could evolve beyond the competitive dynamic that had characterized our adult interactions felt like another gift emerging from the evening's revelations. As William Sterling prepared to leave, he turned to address my entire family with obvious sincerity. I want all of you to know that discovering Sarah and meeting the family that raised her has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I hope we can build relationships that honor both her biological heritage and the family bonds that shaped her into the remarkable person she's become. The evening concluded with plans for future meetings, both family gatherings that would include William Sterling and private conversations between us about building our father-daughter relationship. For the first time in 8 years, I felt the possibility of living without secrets, of integrating all aspects of my identity into relationships that could accommodate the full complexity of who I actually was. 6 months later, as I sat in my office at Sterling Creative Solutions reviewing the quarterly reports that showed our most successful period yet, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by that single evening of revelation. The business was thriving. My relationship with William Sterling had evolved into a meaningful father-daughter bond that included both personal connection and professional collaboration, and my family relationships had been rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect and authentic understanding. David had become not just a brother but a genuine friend, someone who could appreciate my achievements without feeling threatened by them. My parents had evolved into advisors and supporters who understood the magnitude of what I had built while maintaining their roles as the people who had shaped my fundamental values. The elaborate deception that had once seemed necessary for family harmony had been replaced by relationships that were stronger and more meaningful because they were based on complete truth. The integration of my professional and personal identities had eliminated the psychological exhaustion of maintaining multiple personas. I could be the same person in every context, bringing my full self to every relationship and interaction. The relief of authentic living was something I hadn't fully appreciated until I experienced it consistently. Most significantly, the revelation of my biological parentage had provided context for capabilities and instincts that had always felt somewhat mysterious. Understanding the genetic component of my entrepreneurial drives didn't diminish the effort I had put into developing those capabilities, but it did help explain why certain aspects of business strategy had always felt intuitive rather than learned. As I prepared to leave the office for a family dinner that would include both my adoptive parents and William Sterling, I realized that the evening that had begun with forgotten birthday gifts had ultimately given me the most valuable gift imaginable, the opportunity to be completely myself with the people I loved most, without fear, deception, or the exhausting effort of maintaining elaborate facades. The truth had indeed set me free, but more importantly, it had created space for relationships that were deeper, more authentic, and more meaningful than anything I had experienced during my years of careful deception. Sometimes the most important revelations come not when we plan them, but when the universe decides that the time for truth has finally arrived. The weeks following that transformative birthday evening brought changes to our family dynamics that none of us could have anticipated. What had begun as a night of shocking revelations evolved into a period of profound relationship rebuilding, as we all worked to navigate the new reality of who I actually was and what my presence in their lives meant moving forward. David was perhaps the most affected by the revelations, not because he was devastated by learning about my success, but because he was genuinely excited about the possibility of having a sister whose achievements he could admire rather than dismiss. His transformation from someone who had spent years minimizing my capabilities to someone who actively sought my business advice was remarkable in its completeness and sincerity. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, David called me to ask if I would be willing to consult with Patterson and Associates about their digital marketing strategy. His company had been struggling to adapt to changing client expectations around online presence and social media engagement, and David had convinced his supervisors that bringing in Sterling Creative Solutions could provide the expertise they needed to modernize their approach. "Sarah," he said during our phone conversation, his voice carrying a mixture of professional respect and personal vulnerability, "I know this might be awkward, having your brother's company as a client, but I genuinely believe you're the best person to help us solve these challenges." The request represented such a complete reversal of our historical dynamic that I found myself genuinely moved by his willingness to seek my professional guidance. For years, David had positioned himself as the family member with superior business knowledge and practical expertise. His decision to approach me as a consultant represented a level of humility and growth that I hadn't expected from him. "I'd be happy to help," I told him, meaning it completely. "But I want to make sure we handle this professionally." If Sterling Creative takes on Patterson and Associates as a client, you'll be working with our account management team, and any family relationship considerations will be kept completely separate from business decisions. David's relief was audible through the phone. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, he replied. I want to earn your company's services through the quality of our business opportunity, not through family connections. The consulting engagement that followed became a model for how our personal and professional relationships could coexist without compromising either. Sterling Creative's account team worked with Patterson and Associates to develop a comprehensive digital strategy that resulted in a 30% increase in new client acquisition over the following 6 months. David's role in implementing the changes we recommended earned him recognition within his company and ultimately led to his promotion to senior partner. More importantly, the professional collaboration gave us a framework for rebuilding our sibling relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than competitive comparison. David began asking my advice about career decisions, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the opportunity to support his professional growth in ways that didn't require me to diminish my own achievements. Mom and Dad's adjustment to my revealed circumstances took a different form, characterized more by emotional processing than practical changes. The discovery that their daughter was not only financially successful but internationally recognized in her field required them to completely recalibrate their understanding of what my life looked like and what role they played in it. Dad, in particular, struggled with feelings of inadequacy about his ability to provide meaningful guidance to someone whose business expertise far exceeded his own understanding. During one of our private conversations a month after the birthday revelation, he expressed concerns that had been weighing on him since learning the truth about my circumstances. Sarah, he said as we sat in his garage workshop, surrounded by the woodworking tools that had been his hobby for decades, I keep thinking about all the times I offered you advice about money management and career planning. I feel foolish knowing that you were already more financially sophisticated than I could ever hope to be. The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep in my understanding of our relationship. Dad had always defined his paternal role partly through his ability to provide practical guidance and protection. Learning that I had surpassed his capabilities in areas he considered important to responsible adulthood had left him uncertain about how to continue being my father in meaningful ways. Dad, I said, choosing my words carefully, the financial success I've achieved doesn't change the fact that you taught me the fundamental values that guide how I use that success. The importance of treating people fairly, of working hard, of giving back to the community, all of those principles came from you and Mom. My business skills might be sophisticated, but my moral foundation is completely rooted in what you taught me. The conversation marked a turning point in Dad's understanding of his continued relevance in my life. Rather than competing with my professional expertise, he began focusing on the aspects of guidance and support that remained uniquely paternal. His advice about maintaining work-life balance, his encouragement during particularly stressful business periods, and his perspective on staying grounded despite success became invaluable in ways that had nothing to do with technical business knowledge. Mom's adaptation involved coming to terms with the recognition that her maternal instincts had been based on incomplete information for nearly a decade. The discovery that her supposedly struggling daughter was actually thriving professionally required her to reconsider years of worry and concern that had shaped how she approached our relationship. I spent so many nights lying awake worrying about your future, she told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings that had become a new tradition since the birthday revelations. I was afraid you were going to struggle financially forever, that you'd never have security or stability. Learning that you were actually building an empire while I was worrying about your rent money makes me feel like I completely missed what was actually happening in your life. The guilt in her voice was painful to hear, especially since her worry had come from love rather than judgment. Mom's concerns about my financial stability had been rooted in her desire for me to have a secure and comfortable life, not in any belief that I was incapable of achieving success. Your concern came from love, I told her, and that love was exactly what I needed, even when the specific worries weren't based on accurate information. Knowing that you cared about my well-being gave me emotional security that was just as important as financial security. The reassurance seemed to help Mom reframe her years of concern as expressions of parental devotion rather than failures of perception. She began asking more detailed questions about my business operations, not because she wanted to offer advice, but because she wanted to understand and appreciate what I had accomplished. William Sterling's integration into our family dynamic proved to be surprisingly smooth, largely because he approached the relationships with genuine respect for the bonds that already existed rather than trying to claim a position that would compete with my adoptive parents' roles. His understanding that he was adding to my family rather than replacing existing relationships made it possible for everyone to find comfortable ways to include him in our lives. The development of my relationship with William Sterling involved regular private dinners where we could explore our personal connection without the complexity of family group dynamics. These conversations revealed not only the genetic similarities that explain some of my business instincts but also shared perspectives on philanthropy, social responsibility, and the appropriate use of wealth that strengthened our bond beyond simple biological connection. Sarah, William Sterling said during one of our dinners at his private club 6 weeks after our first meeting, "I want you to know that discovering you has changed my understanding of what family means. I've spent decades building business relationships and professional networks, but learning that I have a daughter who shares my values and has achieved remarkable success independently has given me a different perspective on what really matters in life." The emotional weight of his statement was enhanced by my growing understanding of his personal history. William Sterling had been married twice, but neither marriage had produced children, and his relationships had ultimately failed partly because of his intense focus on business growth at the expense of personal connections. Learning about my existence had given him an opportunity to explore paternal feelings that he had never experienced before. "Having you in my life has been equally meaningful," I told him honestly. "Understanding where some of my capabilities came from doesn't diminish the work I put into developing them, but it does provide context that helps me understand myself better." Our relationship began to include professional collaboration as well as personal connection. Sterling Industries became a major client of Sterling Creative Solutions, but more significantly, William Sterling began including me in strategic planning discussions for his various enterprises. The combination of his experience and my innovative approaches to digital marketing created synergies that benefited both our companies while strengthening our personal relationship. Uncle Mark and Aunt Carol's reactions to my revealed circumstances involved their own processes of adjustment and growth. Uncle Mark, whose insurance business had always been respectable but modest in scope, found himself simultaneously proud of my achievements and somewhat intimidated by the scale of what I had accomplished. "Sarah," he said during a family barbecue 2 months after the birthday revelations, "I've been thinking about our conversation that night when I suggested you weren't cut out for business leadership. I realize now that my comments were based on my own limited understanding of what business success could look like." The apology was sincere and reflected genuine self-reflection about his own biases and assumptions. Uncle Mark had built his assessment of my capabilities based on traditional business models that he understood, without considering that innovation and entrepreneurship might take forms that didn't fit conventional templates. "Your business has taught me that success can be built in ways I never imagined," he continued. "The employee benefits you provide, the community investment, the international scope of your operations, all of these represent approaches to business that are more sophisticated than anything I ever considered." The recognition from Uncle Mark felt particularly meaningful because it came from someone whose own business experience gave him credibility to assess professional achievements. His acknowledgement that my methods represented advancement rather than deviation from sound business practices validated my approaches in ways that felt both personally and professionally significant. Aunt Carol's response focused more on the charitable aspects of my revealed activities. Learning about the Sarah Mitchell Foundation and my various educational initiatives had touched her deeply, especially since she had spent her career in social services and understood the impact that well-funded programs could have on individual lives. "Sarah," she told me, "reading about the scholarships you've provided and the business mentorship programs you've established makes me realize that you've been working towards social change on a scale I never imagined. You've been creating opportunities for other people while we thought you were struggling to create opportunities for yourself." The comment highlighted one of the aspects of my hidden success that felt most meaningful to me. The ability to provide educational opportunities for other women pursuing entrepreneurial careers had been deeply satisfying, partly because it addressed barriers I had encountered in my own development and partly because it created lasting impact beyond simple financial transactions. Mrs. Rodriguez's reaction to my revelations had been perhaps the most emotionally powerful of all. As someone who had known me since childhood and had watched my development with the perspective of a longtime family friend, she had insights into my character development that even my immediate family members lacked. Sarah, she said during a private conversation several weeks after the birthday dinner, what moves me most about everything we learned that night is not the financial success or even the family connections, but the consistency between the person you were as a child and the person you've become as an adult. Her observation touched on something I hadn't fully recognized myself. Despite the elaborate deceptions I had maintained about my circumstances, my fundamental character and values had remained consistent throughout my adult development. The generosity, creativity, and determination that Mrs. Rodriguez remembered from my childhood had found expression through my business and charitable activities, even when those activities were hidden from the people who had nurtured those early traits. You were always someone who wanted to help others and build something meaningful, she continued. Learning that you've accomplished both of those goals on such a significant scale feels like watching a childhood promise fulfilled rather than discovering someone completely different. The insight helped me understand that the deception I had maintained was about circumstances rather than character. While I had hidden my achievements and biological parentage, I had never pretended to be someone fundamentally different from who I actually was. The values and personality traits that my family loved had been authentic throughout the period of hidden success. Jessica's adjustment to my revealed circumstances involved her own process of reevaluating our relationship and her role within the extended family dynamic. As someone who had married into the Mitchell family, she had developed her own assumptions about family hierarchies and relative achievements that were challenged by learning about my actual circumstances. Sarah, she said during a shopping trip we took together a month after the revelations, I need to apologize for all the times I offered you advice about professional development and career planning. I was presuming to guide someone who was already more accomplished than I realized. The apology was gracious and reflected Jessica's genuine desire to rebuild our relationship on more appropriate foundations. But more significantly, she began asking my advice about her own career aspirations, which had been somewhat dormant during her focus on raising David's children and supporting his professional advancement. I've been thinking about going back to school for my MBA, she told me. Do you think that's realistic for someone my age with family responsibilities? The question represented a complete reversal of our historical dynamic, with Jessica seeking guidance from someone she had previously viewed as needing direction. More importantly, it opened opportunities for me to support her professional development in ways that strengthened rather than complicated our family relationships. The practical changes that resulted from my revealed circumstances extended beyond emotional adjustments to include concrete modifications in how our family operated and related to each other. The mortgage payment I had made on my parents' house was just the beginning of ways that my financial resources could benefit the people I loved without creating dependency or resentment. David's children, my nephews, became beneficiaries of educational trusts that would ensure their college expenses were completely covered regardless of their academic choices or career interests. But rather than simply providing money, I established mentorship programs that would give them exposure to various professional fields and entrepreneurial opportunities as they grew older. Sarah, David said when I explained the educational trust arrangements, this is incredibly generous, but I want to make sure the boys understand that this opportunity comes with expectations about using their advantages responsibly. The conversation reflected David's growth as both a father and a brother. Rather than simply accepting financial assistance, he wanted to ensure that my support enhanced his children's character development rather than undermining their motivation to work hard and contribute meaningfully to society. Uncle Mark's insurance business became one of the preferred providers for Sterling Creative Solutions' comprehensive employee benefits package, but the relationship was structured to ensure that our family connection didn't compromise the quality or competitiveness of the services provided. The business relationship actually strengthened Uncle Mark's company by exposing him to more sophisticated insurance needs and larger-scale policy management. Aunt Carol's social services background led to her involvement with the Sarah Mitchell Foundation's scholarship program, where her experience evaluating candidates and understanding educational needs proved invaluable. The collaboration gave her work a larger platform while ensuring that the foundation's selection processes were thorough and fair. The integration of William Sterling into our extended family activities required careful navigation to ensure that his presence enhanced rather than disrupted existing traditions and relationships. His first attendance at our monthly family dinner was carefully planned to minimize awkwardness while maximizing opportunities for natural relationship development. William, Dad said, as we gathered around the expanded dining room table that now accommodated our larger family group, we want you to know that having you join us feels right in ways we couldn't have anticipated.
Sarah's happiness is our primary concern, and seeing her able to explore this relationship openly has been wonderful for all of us. The statement reflected the generous spirit that had always characterized my adoptive family's approach to relationships. Rather than viewing William Sterling's presence as threatening or competitive, they had chosen to see it as additive to my support system and emotional well-being. William Sterling's response demonstrated his understanding of the delicate dynamics involved in joining an established family structure. "Robert," he replied, "I want you to know that observing the family that raised Sarah has given me tremendous respect for the values and love that shaped her into the remarkable person she's become." The mutual respect between my biological and adoptive fathers created space for relationships that honored both my heritage and my upbringing without forcing anyone to compete for position or influence. The recognition that I could have meaningful connections with multiple father figures actually strengthened my relationships with both men. As months passed, the elaborate deception that had once seemed necessary for family harmony was replaced by relationships that were stronger precisely because they were based on complete honesty. The exhausting effort of maintaining multiple personas was eliminated, replaced by the relief and energy that came from living authentically in all contexts. The business continued to thrive, partly because I could now discuss my work openly with family members whose support and encouragement proved more valuable than I had anticipated. Dad's questions about employee welfare policies led to improvements in our benefits programs. Mom's concerns about work-life balance resulted in company policies that better supported employees with families. David's insights about legal compliance helped us navigate regulatory challenges more effectively. Most significantly, the integration of my personal and professional identities allowed me to bring my full self to every aspect of my life. The creativity and passion that had always driven my work could now be openly acknowledged and celebrated by the people whose opinions mattered most to me. The success that had once felt isolated and somewhat hollow became meaningful in new ways when it could be shared with family members who understood its significance. The transformation of our family dynamics also created opportunities for collective growth and shared experiences that hadn't been possible when my true circumstances were hidden. We began taking family vacations that I could fund without explanation, visiting destinations and staying in accommodations that reflected my actual financial capabilities rather than my supposed struggles. More importantly, we began collaborating on charitable activities that utilized both my resources and my family members' diverse skills and perspectives. The combination of financial capacity and varied expertise created opportunities for community impact that exceeded what any of us could have accomplished individually. 1 year after that transformative birthday evening, I reflected on how completely my life had been reconstructed around principles of honesty, authenticity, and genuine connection. The relief of living without secrets had been even greater than I had anticipated, eliminating psychological stress that I hadn't fully recognized while I was experiencing it. The relationships that emerged from the period of revelation and adjustment were deeper and more satisfying than anything I had experienced during the years of careful deception. Being loved and accepted for who I actually was, rather than for who I pretended to be, created emotional security that enhanced every aspect of my personal and professional life. The business continued to grow and evolve, but the growth felt more meaningful because it could be openly acknowledged and celebrated by the people who mattered most to me. Success that had once felt isolated became a source of shared pride and collective accomplishment that strengthened family bonds rather than straining them. William Sterling's presence in my life provided not just biological connection but also mentorship and collaboration that enhanced both our professional and personal development. The father-daughter relationship we built was based on mutual respect and shared values rather than obligation or guilt, creating bonds that felt both natural and deeply meaningful. Perhaps most importantly, the experience of living authentically taught me that the fear of rejection that had motivated years of deception was largely unfounded. The people who truly loved me were capable of adapting to new information and growing in response to changed circumstances. Their love was strong enough to accommodate truth, even when that truth challenged their assumptions and expectations. As I prepared for another family dinner that would include both my adoptive parents and William Sterling, along with David's family, Uncle Mark and Aunt Carol, and Mrs. Rodriguez, I realized that the gift I had received on that forgotten birthday was not recognition or validation, but liberation. The freedom to be completely myself with the people I loved most had transformed not just my own life, but the lives of everyone around me.
The truth had indeed set us all free, creating space for relationships that were more honest, more supportive, and more meaningful than anything we had experienced when important aspects of our reality were hidden or misunderstood. Sometimes the most important revelations come not when we plan them, but when the universe decides that the time for complete honesty has finally arrived. The woman who had once hidden her success to protect relationships had learned that authentic relationships could not only survive truth but actually required it to reach their full potential. The family bonds that had seemed fragile enough to need protection through deception had proven strong enough to grow and adapt in response to complete honesty. That realization felt like the most valuable gift of all, the understanding that love based on truth is always stronger than love based on comfortable fiction, and that the people who matter most deserve the opportunity to love us for exactly who we are, rather than who we think they need us to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.